Noah, 32, was engaged to Kristen, 29, and had been with her for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. His best friend Brian, 31, was supposed to be his best man. Looking back, there were signs. Kristen went to the gym more often, coming home late with excuses, keeping her phone face down, smiling at late-night texts, but locking her phone when Noah got close. When he asked, she accused him of being controlling and insecure. Yesterday, he was supposed to be at a site visit until the evening, but the meeting ended early. Wanting to surprise Kristen, he picked up takeout from her favorite place. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Brian's truck. He was supposed to be at work. Holding the food, Noah stared at the license plate, hoping he was mistaken. Using his key quietly, he heard noises upstairs. Everything went silent except for his own heartbeat. He opened the bedroom door, and there they were, Kristen and Brian in the bed he had helped pick out, the bed where they had talked about their future. Kristen saw him first, and instead of looking guilty, she smirked. "What are you going to do? Cry?" Brian stammered. "Bro, I can explain." But Noah cut him off. "Don't call me bro." Kristen, still smirking, wrapped the sheet around herself. "Say something. Go ahead, have your little breakdown." Instead, Noah pulled out his phone, took pictures, and said, "Thanks for making this easy," before walking out. Kristen yelled after him, calling him a coward. At the doorway, he turned back and said, "No, I'm just getting started." That night, he stayed at a motel. By morning, his phone was filled with missed calls and texts from both Kristen and Brian, begging him not to tell Brian's wife, Judith. Kristen threatened him, saying, "You better not ruin my life over this, or you'll regret it." What they didn't know was that Noah had suspected something for weeks. Kristen had forgotten she was still logged into their shared iPad, and had screenshots, messages, plans, lies. He spent the morning making calls, starting with the bank. Their joint accounts were emptied, his half moved to a new account, and her credit card stopped working. The engagement ring was left on the kitchen table with a note. "Hope he's worth it." Both their phones continued blowing up, but he ignored them. Judith was informed immediately. Kristen's sister called him cruel for not letting Kristen explain. Explain what? How she accidentally fell on Brian. Watching them panic was almost entertaining. Kristen and Brian's messages went back months. They had been meeting at Brian's gym, using Noah's credit card to pay for the sessions. At the bank, when Noah explained why he was separating their accounts, the bank teller sympathized. "Honey, my sister went through the same thing. Take him for everything." Around noon, Kristen showed up at his place, crying, apologizing, calling it a mistake. He let her talk herself in circles before she got angry. "You're really going to throw away 3 years over one mistake," she yelled. He calmly responded, "You know what's funny? I was coming home early to surprise you. Had dinner reservations and everything. Guess I was the one who got surprised instead." When he mentioned the iPad messages, she turned pale, accusing him of violating her privacy. He laughed. "Privacy? Like the privacy of our bed, where I found you with my best friend." Then Brian showed up, trying to act tough. "We should talk this out like men." Noah stared at him. 15 years of friendship, and you couldn't keep your dick out of my fiancée? There's nothing to talk about." Brian stepped up aggressively. "What, you gonna hit me? Go ahead, give me a reason to call the cops." Noah didn't flinch. Brian backed down. Meanwhile, Noah had been busy. He had receipts from those gym sessions, along with messages detailing their workouts. Judith deserved to know. He sent her everything. An hour later, Brian's phone was blowing up. Guess who was sleeping on someone's couch that night? Kristen started spinning the story, telling friends that Noah was overreacting. But screenshots don't lie. Some mutual friends suggested he should forgive her. Those were probably the same ones who knew and said nothing. The wedding venue called about the final payment. Noah told them the wedding was off and explained why. The coordinator was surprisingly understanding. Happens more often than you'd think. At least you found out before the wedding. He moved most of his stuff to his brother's place, changed his passwords, and ordered new credit cards. Kristen kept texting from different numbers, switching between begging and threats. Brian sent messages too, blaming Noah for destroying his marriage. Noah found that ironic. That night, he met with Judith to compare notes. They both wanted to know how long this had been going on. It was an eye-opening conversation. What Kristen and Brian didn't know was that Noah had more evidence. A lot more, and he was just getting started. 2 weeks later, Kristen's biggest client reached out to verify Noah's reference for her. He simply told the truth, that he could no longer vouch for her and that, while he couldn't speak to her professional conduct, he wouldn't feel comfortable being her referent. The client pulled out. That night, Kristen showed up at his place, furious, recording everything on her phone, clearly trying to provoke him into reacting badly on camera. "You vindictive piece of shit. You cost me my biggest sale of the year." She got in his face. Phone raised. He stood there, hands in his pockets, calm. "Actions have consequences. Kristen, you should have thought about that before." My best friend completely lost it. She started throwing my own patio chairs at my front door after I went inside. I called the police non-emergency line and recorded everything from my window. They gave her a warning for disturbing the peace. The look on her face when she realized her little recording stunt had backfired was priceless. But that wasn't even the main event. Brian's wife, Judith, deserved to know the truth. I reached out and asked to meet her for coffee, bringing copies of all the screenshots, text messages, and photos I had gathered. She was surprisingly calm while going through everything until she found messages from January. They had been doing this for months, way before I caught them. "He told me he was at the gym," she kept saying, scrolling through timestamps of Brian and Kristen's meetups. "He said he was working late all those nights." She started crying right there in Starbucks. Judith's revenge was way more brutal than anything I could have planned. She waited until Brian was doing his usual Saturday morning workout session with clients, showed up at the gym, walked straight up to him, and dumped a protein shake all over his head in front of everyone. Then she started reading their messages out loud, the explicit ones, the ones where they mocked both me and Judith. The gym video went viral in our local Facebook groups. Brian lost half his clients within days. Turns out people don't like trainers who sleep with their best friend's fiancée. His Instagram following tanked too. Goodbye, fitness influencer dreams. Kristen tried damage control on social media, posting some long sob story about how sometimes love is messy and people make mistakes when they're confused. She even tried to paint herself as the victim somehow. That's when I decided to go nuclear. At our engagement party, Kristen had given a tearful speech about how I saved her after her last relationship, how I was the most loyal, trustworthy man she'd ever known. Everyone recorded it. I edited together clips of that speech with screenshots of her messages to Brian, planning their hookups around my work schedule, and posted it in response to her pity post. She called me crying yesterday. Actually crying this time, not the fake tears she used at the party. "Please take it down, Noah. People are calling my parents. My sister won't talk to me. Brian won't even answer my texts anymore. What am I going to do?" "Cry," I said, then hung up. Their affair bubble had burst spectacularly. Brian was sleeping on his buddy's couch. Judith changed the locks. Kristen's broker was pissed about losing that big client. Most of our friends had chosen sides, and surprisingly, most chose mine. Turns out people don't like cheaters who mock their victims. I wasn't done yet. I had more evidence, more screenshots, more truth bombs to drop, but honestly, watching them destroy their own lives was so much more satisfying than anything I could do. Brian and Kristen were both frantically calling and texting, begging me to talk things out and find closure. They were scared because they knew I still had more receipts. The best part? I was totally at peace. Every morning, I woke up and thanked whatever force in the universe made me come home early that day. Imagine if I had married her, had kids, bought a house. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. These past few weeks have been intense, but I promise to tell you how this ends. Remember how I mentioned having some cards left to play? I played them all. Nothing illegal, nothing that could get me in trouble, just pure, methodical dismantling of their lives. They want to play games? Fine by me. Kristen had mocked me. What are you going to do? Cry. Those words kept repeating in my head. So I made some calls. It turned out our neighbor's security camera had a perfect view of our driveway. For months, she had been bringing Brian over whenever I had late shifts or was away. I compiled everything, dates, times, text messages from our shared iPad that she forgot to delete. Then I waited. Last week was her big pitch to this wealthy couple looking to buy property. She had been bragging about it for months. The commission would have set her up for the year. Guess who the couple's close friend was? My cousin Edgar. One quick conversation about Kristen's business practices and ethical standards, backed up with proof of her letting Brian into our house while engaging me, and they pulled out. But it didn't stop there. The thing about small towns, word travels fast, especially when you have evidence. I didn't spread rumors. I just showed people the truth when they asked. Her phone started blowing up with canceled appointments. Turns out couples looking to buy homes prefer agents who don't sleep with their clients' spouses. And yes, Brian had trained some of her clients. Speaking of Brian, Judith had been suspicious for a while, but had no proof. I gave her everything, the videos, the texts, the times he was supposedly training late. Their confrontation was epic. He came home to find his stuff on the lawn, and the locks changed. Judith is a force of nature when she's angry. She works at the same gym where Brian trained clients. Guess who suddenly had scheduled conflicts with all his high-paying clients? The best part? They turned on each other. Brian blamed Kristen for being too obvious. Kristen blamed Brian for not being careful enough. Their perfect little affair imploded spectacularly. Last night was a cherry on top. I was at this local bar with some friends when they walked in together. Kristen spotted me and had the nerve to approach. "You're pathetic," she spat. "Destroying our lives because you couldn't handle the truth." I just smiled. "Handle the truth? Honey, I'm handling it just fine. How's that big commission work?" Brian tried to step in, but I wasn't done. "And you, brother, how's the training business? Judith told me the gym's thinking of letting you go. Something about client complaints." He swung at me. "Big mistake. Huge. I may work behind a desk now, but I grew up rough." 10 seconds later, he was on the floor, nose bleeding. I didn't even get kicked out. The bartender saw him swing first. I filed a police report too, just to be safe. This morning, Kristen's broker called her in for a meeting. Turns out sleeping with client spouses and losing major deals raises some red flags. She's on probation pending review. Brian's getting divorced, lost most of his clients, and might lose his job. Their little affair is already showing cracks. Last I heard, they're fighting constantly, blaming each other for everything falling apart. Me? I met someone. Aspen. She's nothing like Kristen, honest, direct, no games. We're taking it slow, but it feels real. She knows my story and understands why I keep receipts for everything now. The point of revenge isn't to break the law or hurt people physically. It's about letting them face the consequences of their actions, maybe with a little push in the right direction. They thought I was weak because I walked away that night. They mistook patience for weakness. Big mistake. Karma's not a bitch. She's just really good at paperwork and has excellent timing.